Welcome to You Can Trust Yourself podcast, where authenticity and self trust are really, really valued here. Because trusting ourselves is where our authenticity lies, and authenticity is powerful in a world that desperately needs more authentic humans. I'm your host, Megan Spencer, clinical mental health therapist and podcast host, here to tell you stories, strategies, and hold space in a world that desperately needs more self trust. We are trying to trust ourselves here. So, welcome. Enjoy the show. Hi, all of you. Welcome back to another episode of You Can Trust Yourself podcast. This feels like the beginning of a new era in a lot of ways. For those of you who missed last week's episode, I chatted about, what is kind of to come for the podcast and the show now that it is me as the sole host. And I took the week to kind of sit with what that meant and the emotions that came with that. And I'm really excited about today's episode because it's really going to set the foundation for this new era and for this new um, show, essentially. A lot of the same like theories and topics and themes are going to apply, but the root of it is going to be a little different because it's really coming from me and what I feel so called to do in my life's work and my area of expertise. And so we're going to chat all about that today. I hope you all are having as good of a, Monday as you can if you're listening to this on Monday morning. And let's kind of dive in. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what we can expect. And I say we, as I have this expectation of myself too, moving forward. Well, let me give you a tiny bit of a backstory slash how this came to be. As many of you probably know, because I've talked about it quite a bit, I've had a really, I don't know, complicated, messy, love, hate, whatever you want to call it, relationship with social media and showing up in this virtual space, mainly because I love humans. And if you really have listened to this show or really know me in real life, I like to be near humans. I want to smell you. Ideally, I want to touch you, not in a weird way, but like I just want to hold your hand. I love being in the company of other humans. I find that that is where, I feel most like connected to self when I'm alone, but I feel most connected to humanity when I'm in the presence of other humans. And so, with all that being said, the virtual space of social media, podcasting, it can feel really difficult for me to show up there because I feel like I'm missing that human to human interaction. So, if any of you relate to that, one, let's start meeting up. Let's get some live podcast tours going because I want to be in the same room with you. I want to talk about these topics that are so, so, so important and be in community. So, we're going to really, one thing that I'm trying to bring here and you can expect is more community, more connectedness, more humanness. On our podcast. And one of the ways that I'm going to do that is kind of like how I'm showing up today. I am not trying to focus so much on like aesthetic or everything looking great. I'll try and spare you, like, I'll at least have a shirt on and I'll at least, maybe clean up behind me. I'm in a hotel right now, so the aesthetic is actually already really nice. Um, but I'm not trying to focus on that so much. You're going to expect a lot of like sweatshirts, makeup free, just raw, unfiltered aesthetic because it just feels more real and authentic to me. And if I'm showing up here talking about authenticity, I need to really lean into that more. And on social media, I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this. It often feels like showing up like truly raw and human is one, scary. It is not super welcomed. And it is at times dangerous, right? So there's a fine line between showing up authentically. And I also know that the virtual world needs more of that. So we're going to do that over here. So that is one thing that you can really expect is having that more raw, unfiltered, human connection with me here. And I'm excited to chat more about that. But let's talk about today's topic. So I'm really, really looking forward to having a conversation with you today because when I, knew, okay, we're coming back, we're doing the podcast, just me, like, what are we going to kick this off with? And as we talk about self-trust and trusting yourself, I think even for me, sometimes I know how self-trust feels because I've been practicing this for so many years and I've, been working on this individually in my own therapy. And now, on the other side, as me being in the therapist seat, I talk about this a ton with my clients of how do we show up in self? And so I think I have to start this episode by giving a little bit of what does self mean, what does self-trust mean, and then we can kind of unfold from there. So when I explain self to clients, I use it from the framework and theory of IFS counseling slash theories, which is internal family systems. Dick Swartz is the founder of this theory, and there are so many like tools, information, resources. So if you're curious about that, or if you see a therapist, or if you are a therapist, or in the counseling world, it's a worthy theory to kind of explore because essentially the breakdown of it is self is kind of at the center of us, and it's known as true self, or where a lot of our wisdom, a lot of our trust, a lot of our authenticity lies is in self. And then if you follow the theory, there's parts of us, right? So we all have these parts of us. You can have an inner critic. I like to refer to it a lot of times for my clients who are running more on the anxious side. We'll talk about the anxious parts of us. I have some clients who have OCD, since that is an area that I specialize in, and am a member of that community. I will talk about like this OCD part of you, and it basically is just a way of having a framework of we have ourselves right at the center, and then we have all of these parts of us. And I really align with that framework. So I'm going to bring a lot of that here to the podcast. And for the purpose of our show, though, we're going to be talking primarily about self and how we can continue to access ourself more. And the reason why it's so hard for us to show up as ourselves, right, or to show up authentically is because this world is constantly telling us that showing up as ourselves is not allowed, right? And it's not okay, and it is a lot of times unwelcomed. And that's why I connect so heavily to this work and having this community here is that every time I or my clients or you all listening show up as yourselves and trust yourselves, I feel like it just counteracts this world that doesn't appreciate self. And if we're talking about humanity, though, and humanness, what is more human than being yourself, right? Like, what is more human? I know I'm getting a little deep here. That's what I do. Like, what is more authentic or real or human than being yourself or trying our best to be ourselves? And I've spent too much of my life being many different people, many different versions of myself, if you will, and I still find myself doing it to this day. Um, Even on this podcast, I've listened back to some episodes and I have this voice that I'll kind of put on. And it doesn't mean that it's like wrong or bad or fake, maybe in some ways, but it really is it's like this on version of myself. And I talk about this a lot with my clients of we have these like on versions of ourselves or these masks that we put on. And for a lot of individuals, especially of different cultures, races, religious groups, there's a phrase called code switching that is very, very real. And a lot of times very necessary to switch or embellish certain parts of yourself to in a lot of ways survive in different places and societies. And so the best example that I can kind of give you of how this can look, and it's just a silly example, but have you ever gone to like a fancy department store, like a, one of the fancier ones, or like a fancy, designer store, right? And I used to do this a lot when I was younger. I would go into these designer stores because at that time in my life, I was like, oh, I really want to own some of these things. And I really want this bag or this wallet or whatever it may be. And I would feel myself switch as soon as I entered the doors. I would instantly try and like act more sleek or act more chic, professional, talk different, because I wanted to appear like I, was able to afford these things, even though I absolutely could not, and in a lot of ways still cannot afford these things easily. Um, it was that part of me that wanted to belong in a different world, and so I would switch or embellish based on that. Now that is a very like low level version of this. There are people who especially of different races, backgrounds, cultural groups, religious groups who, for survival purposes, have had to literally switch their personalities and their beings out of safety. And that is a conversation for another time. I'm not going to go too deep into that today, but I wanted to start out with the real truth of why do we switch out of self, right? And the reason is because this world makes it hard to stay in self. That's the true answer, is that this world, the way this world is lived, not every part of this world, but especially here in the States, the way that this world is set up, being in self is really, really, really difficult and at times extremely dangerous. And so as we unfold this conversation, I want to talk a little bit more about how we can start to access self and how this is really the key to being able to show up authentically in our lives and how this relates to self trust. So, what we're going to talk about is being yourself is like a superpower. And the reason why is because when you have met someone who really just seems like their self, right? Like I have an example. One of the workout classes that I go to, one of the instructors there, she is, every time I see her, I just get like so excited to be around her because she just seems so authentic. Like a song comes on, she'll start just like dancing to herself. Like it's not for show, it's not for anyone else. Like it seems so authentic to her. And the way that she speaks and says things, like she just seems so in self, like just so true to herself, so real, so authentic. And I'm sure you can think of people that you've met who you're like, wow, like being around them just felt like I could be me, right? Like I just felt safe around them. I felt comfortable. I felt like I could just be myself. And that, unfortunately, is a rare experience, right? It's rare to be around people where you're like, I could just melt into your presence because I feel like you are just real. And the theory that I'm talking about, IFS, and just, how I try and live my life and how I talk to my clients a lot of times is when we're rooted in self, that just can come kind of naturally. The problem is that it's very easy to get taken out of self. And I find this a lot. And that's something that I work on personally, is that it's kind of one of these things where like we can struggle to stay in it. And so, what we're going to talk about today is ways that we're able to stay in self by practicing our ability to trust ourselves. And self trust can be something as simple as making a decision and just sticking with it, seeing how it goes, right? We have to start to practice this ability to stay in self because the stakes are really, really high. And if we don't stay in self and we don't stay with ourselves, we can very, very, very quickly end up in lives and places and decisions that we did not mean to. And that can lead to resentment of one's life, that can lead to dissatisfaction. Um, and so when we live a life in self, it doesn't mean that it's easy. In fact, a lot of times I think that living or trying to live authentically or in ourselves is actually harder a lot of times. In some ways, I think just doing the whole, I don't know, put one foot in front of the other, survive the day, robotic, people pleasing, that vibe. In some ways, it's easier because there's already a blueprint for it. I mean, look around, look at social media, look at people. Like some people, it's so robotic. Hi, how are you? Yep, good. How are you? It's so inundated in our society to be just to not be ourselves, that the stakes of that are really, really high, though, because then we live this whole life, hopefully, this whole life not rooted in ourselves. And the flip side of that is that living in self is really, really hard because we have to continuously keep a pulse on this. And I know that today is kind of like a broad, maybe even a little messy of an episode. And I kind of love that because this topic is messy. And those of you who get it and who want to connect to this work will understand it. It will resonate with you. And I will do more like streamlined videos too, I promise, of, certain topics or techniques so that you can really leave with something that you're like, oh yeah, I get that. I can put that into practice right away. But for this first episode, I really wanted to just have this very honest conversation of what it means to be in self and what the pros and cons and risks are to not being in self. And so I want to kind of leave with this conversation, and hopefully it's an encourager for those of you listening. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this. I'm going to try and do shorter podcast episodes to hopefully release more of them. Um, Doing a solo podcast for an hour, just I don't think I can talk to you all for an hour solo. So shorter episodes to come, but I really want to leave you with this to think about. And for those of you who are listening, I think about this a lot of times with my clients, and I think about how when they are working towards self and being in their own knowing and truly like leaning into authenticity, they are going out into the world and other people get to experience what that's like to be around them. That effect of me talking here and somebody here taking this and then going and living authentically or as close to authentically as we can in your own life, what that does is it creates this ripple. And what it does is it connects us all deeper, right? And I know that I talk about really deep topics here, and thank goodness, right? And that's a part of me that sometimes I'm like, oh, it's so deep. Does anybody else feel like this? But I know that a lot of people do. It's just that we're so on the surface of like everyday life that we don't always come here. And I think I stay in the deep world because of my work and therapy and stuff like that. Um, but our ability to truly be with self is a ripple effect that connects us all as humans. And it's time we bring that to the virtual space. And so I am so, so, so happy to have you all listening and for us to be able to create a community. Let's try and get it as an in person community too, of more self and more people trusting themselves to live a richer life. Because when we have a rich life that is rich in connection and community and activism and love, and trying our best to run towards the work that we're called towards, of how do we make our part of the world a little bit better, that is really, really special. And I feel very, very connected to that. And I think those of you listening also feel very connected to that, hence why you're clicking on this podcast. And we are going to do that little by little. We are going to move towards a world that is rooted in self and self trust. Because when people are rooted in self, you are called towards beautiful things a lot of times. A lot of times. I know there's some outliers, but a lot of times it's beautiful, rich things that help different parts of our world. And I want to share with you, I have a client, and I'm not going to go into details, obviously, because they are my client, but they're in a position where they really um, have a lot of you know, agency over policy changes and stakes and things like that. And their ability to trust themselves in that world. I mean, just think about that for a second, right? In policies and procedures of the way that this world is run, if more people are rooted in self, that can really help to create some serious change. And that, my friends, I think we can all agree on is that we'd like some change. And we got to start with trusting ourselves. And sometimes we're going to start with the little things of trusting ourselves to keep it fun. And it just allows us all to be richer in a lot of ways. And so this is a heavier episode, and that's okay. I got to set the stage, right? We got to set the stage. And I am very, very excited to get on here. I don't know if I'm going to do it like a couple a week or once a week. I'm not sure yet the layout of what you can expect, but I do know that you can expect me to show up here. And all I ask is that you do the same in your lives. Try your best as often as you can to show up in self. And we're going to talk more about that. So I will see you all next time on the show. And until then, I hope you are deeply, deeply, deeply excited to start working on self-trust and authenticity. So I'll see you soon. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of You Can Trust Yourself podcast. If you would, please stop by on social media. I want to chat with you all. I want to connect. Please, if you would also leave a 5-star rating and review on the show. This really just helps the show to be able to grow and to connect with more humans and leads to more self-trust. So thank you again for being here, and I'll see you next time.